Welcome back to your nightmares, my children. This is Mr. Midnight speaking. I welcome you all to my humble abode. I will be sharing with you some scary stories regarding skinwalkers, my brethren. You shouldn't be scared of them because I am more scarier. So, buckle up and let me feast on your fears and sorrows. Let's begin, and always remember, the darkness always follows. I will now leave you with my narrator, so enjoy.
Number 1. Help. Just bought a home with property, and something isn't right. I just bought a home on the Ohio-Michigan border. It is in the middle of the woods. I only own about 5 acres, but it is surrounded by over 600 acres of woodland. There is only one other house nearby. I've noticed a few strange things and had a few strange things happen recently. I will explain in detail. I'm worried about the possibility of a Wendigo or Skinwalker, but I am not knowledgeable on the subject and would like to learn as much as possible to protect my family. The red flags. An older single woman sold us the home. Her daughter and son-in-law were helping her sell it by the owner. Many times the daughter mentioned about how her mother was paranoid living there. She had lived there for over 20 years, but now never leaves the home, even though she is in good health. She said she would never answer the door whenever someone knocked, and there are cameras outside. There is also a flashlight in every room. They accepted our offer of about 60,000 under asking price. We loved the property and told them that, but couldn't afford what they were asking. They met us where we could afford it. During the home inspection, the inspector tried opening a window and it was stuck shut. He went to try another and the homeowner stated, "None of the windows open. They haven't in years." I didn't think anything of it and just assumed they were old and broken. The home was built in 1985 and had original windows. The inspector also found some issues with the exterior of the house. There appeared to be a lack of maintenance outside. Once again, the family stated that the homeowner just didn't like to be outside anymore and spent all her time inside. I met with the homeowner at her house again so I could gather some measurements. While I was there, she showed me how a few things in the home work. She made it a point to show me a light on a pole outside. She said, "If that light ever goes out, replace it immediately. It is way too dark out there without it." She has also stated that at night we will hear coyotes right up against the house, as they like to gather by a bush near the front porch in the winter. A co-worker of mine has lived in the woods 2 counties over for years. He just went through a rough divorce and was forced to sell his house. He just gifted me an Axis deer skull with antlers. He said it was gifted to him when he bought his property and he kept it by his front door. He now wants me to have it and suggested I hang it up outside. I'm a hunter and I thought it was cool and never thought more of it until now. My fiance and I have both been having nightmares, not about a Wendigo, but my nightmare is about my newborn son getting possessed by something. I've had the dream a few times. My fiance won't tell me about her dream. We haven't taken possession yet, but we will on November the 6th. I'm concerned something is going on with the property. I want to know if you all think I have anything to worry about. If you think I do, what can I do? Update from Help, I bought a home with property and something isn't right. We have been living at the new house for 13 days now. We have taken some of your recommendations of cleansing the home to get any bad vibes out. And things have been great. But there's a creepy pattern happening. For the third time, I just found bones just outside our door. This time, it was what appears to be a deer femur head. This was found outside of the door that leads to the back deck. A few nights ago, there was a pile of smaller bones by the door leading to the front porch. And one of the first few nights we moved in, there was a long bone by the rear door, right by where I just found the femur head. I didn't think anything of it the first two times, assuming the long bone was left out there by the previous owner, and I chalked up the pile of bones to an animal. But it's weird that it's happened 3 times now, and each time by a door. Is this something to be worried about? The only other strange things happening are I cannot get the motion lights to work outside. They were already installed. I changed the bulbs twice now in them, and they worked when I went inside. Next night, they did not. So far, I'm just chalking this up to bad wiring. A few times we have heard a very strange sound outside coming from the woods. I'm an avid hunter and do a lot of camping and have never heard it before. It sounds like a loud propeller chopping through the woods. Possibly sounds elevated off the ground, but it's hard to tell. After it passes though, the woods go crazy. It wakes everything up. We see deers running around after, can hear coyotes howl. It takes a few minutes for everything to settle back down. Do either of these things sound like I'm dealing with something out of my league? I'm sorry for the dumb questions and stories, but there's just something about this property that makes me worried. Thank you. Number 2. Freaked out from what I saw. When I was around 10 or 12, roughly 12 years ago, me and my grandma and uncle went to Jasper in Canada. Given how I was born in Canada itself, nothing weirded me out when it came to the woods and nature as a whole. I've seen and heard deer before and a whole slew of animals. I don't remember much from the trip other than a bits and pieces, but what I do remember was arriving at the hotel and climbing up the steps to the second floor. The hotel had a parking lot in front before the road. I remember waking up one morning in the hotel while my grandma and uncle were still asleep and walking over to the window to peer out from behind the blinds to see a fox standing in the middle of the road. It looked like it had been run over given how oddly it was shaped. Concerned for its safety, I wanted to wake up my grandma or simply run out there to check on it. I felt my stomach sink when it turned to face me. Its head looked bruised and misshapen, which I would have ruled out as it having been run over had it not stood on its hind legs. I turned my head away from the window and yelled for my grandma to wake up, who slept in her bed just a couple feet away. Before I looked back, and saw it walk on those hind legs to the side where the building hid my view from the rest of the road. I looked completely insane when my grandma moved me aside and saw nothing on the road, even going as far as to open the door and peer down both ends of the walkway. Nothing. Regardless, I can say with confidence, I'm not going back to Casper. Number 3. Navajo Mountain Reservation, Utah. My father and uncle have a story of living as outsiders, non-native Caucasian, young people on the reservation. Their tale of experiencing a skinwalker. My grandma taught school on the reservation and they lived well off compared to the natives living there. From what I know, there's a lot of law surrounding the Navajo Nation. Non-natives, primarily older generations, keeping their experiences and stories left unspoken, especially to those not from the culture. Forgive me if I'm mistaken in any of this. The culture, ideology, practices, or any other part. I'm just trying to tell the story my family has only spoken to me in whispers about. My grandmother, father, and uncle lived there for a few years, and their experience was much different than the Navajo people who have lived there for generations upon generations. I just want to tell their story and get insight as to anyone else who has lived in that community and any other stories some people might be willing to share. My father and uncle are about 2 years apart in age. They lived in Navajo Mountain in the 1980s. My dad was 10 to 12 and my uncle was younger. As it goes, they were always outside, riding bikes with their friends, natives of the reservation. My grandma was recovering from an abusive relationship with their father and wasn't too concerned with their whereabouts, being it was a small community. There wasn't much trouble around, nor would they know what real trouble was at that age. Trouble wasn't the issue to young white boys on a reservation then. Pure terror was. It was a typical night without any parental supervision. The night was colder than usual and the night sky was blacker than you could imagine. In such a desolate place, the stars in the sky would light the night. This night was as if the earth had moved to a different dimension, an abyss. The boys raced each other, as they did every night, until they were compelled to force their brakes in unison. They simultaneously looked up. Each boy's face melted from carefree, innocent, and adolescent to unadulterated horror. The boys stood motionless, grasping their bikes with every nerve, muscle, and strength in their body on the dirt road. To the right of them was a mesa, one they rode by every day. The mesa that paralleled from my family's home, the mesa that they could see through my father and uncle's bedroom every night. The mesa would become fear and nightmares to them from this night forward. At the top of the mesa was a roaring fire, taller than any bonfire that someone could assemble, bigger than a group of people could assemble. It raged and was unbelievable. It was almost as tall as the mesa itself. More unbelievable was a pitch black figure seen cavorting around the bonfire. The native boys with my father and uncle informed them that this was not a typical Navajo dancer or ritual. Pits began to form in their stomachs. Friends of my father and uncle turned back around without a word and bolted back to their homes. My father and uncle threw their bags to the ground and ran across the unpaved road into their home. The two came back in a panic, relaying what they'd seen to my grandmother, but she was unconcerned. A legend of the natives, she told them, and shooed them away. They laid awake all night in their shared room, not saying a word to one another. They forced their curtains as close as possible, too scared to look out the window and see what they shouldn't have to begin with. Neither could shake the image burned into their memory, but the sun managed to rise and peek through into their room. A sense of release washed over them as the darkness had faded. The boys left their beds and travelled to the kitchen to try a second time to tell my grandmother what they saw that night. They tried to get a handle on what they saw, but it was as if they couldn't explain it. Again, my grandmother brushed them off with a coffee and newspaper more important than their story. She told them to climb the mesa and investigate. The boys wrangled the friends who shared the experience with the night prior as they passed on their bikes. The friends stayed on the dirt road, looking up at the mesa as my father and uncle climbed up to see any evidence of the hell-burning fire they witnessed together. The mesa wasn't much taller than an average one-story house, so the brothers took less than 2 minutes to climb to the top where the nightmare took place. When they got to the top, they were hysterical and also relieved. There was no indication a bonfire of that enormity or even a fire at all had taken place on the mesa they had clearly seen the night earlier. They climbed down and told the message to their friends who had also been a part of the shocking scene. Their native friends looked at them in shock, but neither said a word to them. They immediately turned their backs around and proceeded home. It was never talked about again, despite my father and brother asking about it. My grandmother and everyone else in the community refused to talk about it again. My father is a skeptic. He does not believe in anything paranormal. Aliens, ghosts, mermaids, you name it. But whenever I ask about the skinwalker he saw, he turns pale and white. He gets quiet, jumpy and curt. I had to plead to get the full story out of him, and I could see goosebumps and every hair standing up on his arm when he shared his experience. My grandma took me to Navajo Mountain in 2019 to show me her history and to see how Navajo natives still live on this reservation today. According to her, not much has changed since living there in the 80s. I hiked and explored what I could of the reservation as to not invade or violate any of the Navajo reservation and its beauty. However, I did feel a change in mood when I visited. My existence felt heavy, as if I wasn't supposed to be there, or if I was invading on territory that wasn't meant for me. Not caused by any of the community there, but just by my presence being on the land. I will never forget my experience visiting and all that I learned about reservation life. My intention is to hear any other stories from Navajo Mountain residents or talk with some people with similar stories in the Navajo reservation. I climbed the mesa where the Skinwalker my dad and uncle claimed had its ritual. I felt pretty normal until I got to the top and stood in the middle. I felt some darkness creep into me as I stood there. I've never been the same since. And now I will be reviewing each story and mentioning the authors and thanking them. I would firstly like to thank all the authors that let me use their story, and I'm going to now review each one of them. So the first story was published to Reddit by one additional 2103, and the title of the story was Help, just bought a home with property and something isn't right. Now this is a very good written piece. It's scary and very creepy, as again it's a house in the middle of the woods. Now what good is going to come of that? The woods, when we think of the woods, we think of killers, skinwalkers, ghosts, monsters, spirits. So I don't think a house in the middle of the woods is a good idea, to be honest. If I was the OP, I would leave immediately and find a different place. But I guess you got a bargain for the house. There were red flags, and now you're paying the price. I guess with all the bones that are appearing on the doorsteps, could be a skinwalker, maybe not. Um, but I would suggest you'd leave that place. And this was a very good story. I give it a 10 out of 10. I loved it, especially with the update that was given after as well on what was going on after. And this is why I loved it. But I would say that you move out. Okay, that's my word of advice. Because when these demons and skinwalkers can scare you, they're gonna keep doing that. Okay, that's what they love doing. Now, the second story was by Computerized Anon, and the title was Freaked Out from What I Saw. You can find these stories on Reddit and make sure you show love to these authors and these stories. Now, this story was creepy to say the least, as also it was probably a skinwalker because they are usually seen as foxes or coyotes and dogs, I guess. So they can change their form. So this could well have been a skinwalker because they are in even videos and people when they tell their stories they are walking on their hind legs. And yes, I think you saying that you're not going to Jasper again is a good call from your end. You shouldn't go there, as Canada is very cold. First of all, it's very cold over there. I don't know how people live there. And also, if there are skinwalkers about, I would suggest you stay clear of Jasper and even Canada. No, Canada is really beautiful actually. Now, the final story was uploaded to Reddit by Spicy Slopper 801, and the story title was Navajo Mountain Reservation, Utah. Now, this was beautifully written, I have to say. A lot of description and a lot of detail. It's really good. You should think of becoming an author, to be honest. I myself do dabble in writing, but this was very beautifully written, and it was very creepy and scary. As first of all, skinwalkers are scary, but you added a ritual into this, and it's probably real. I'm going to assume it's real. If it's real, it's very scary, and the way you described it was good. If it's fiction, then it was amazingly written, and there are two scary factors here. The fact that there was a skinwalker and there was a fiery ritual that your father and uncle found. So it was very good, and I rate this 100 out of 10 because I really loved it. Now I'm going to end the video here. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed the narration and the stories. If you did, make sure you show love to the creators. They can be found on Reddit. Like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you again soon. Now I'm going to leave Mr. Midnight to do the outro.
Well, my children, thank you all for listening. I hope this filled you with fear, because I know it did. I can feel and taste your fears and sorrows. And oh my, it is very exhilarating. I'll see you very soon. So, until then, love the darkness, as it always follows.